Um, so usually, what's the attendance like? I mean, how many people approximately attend the class? So that time I'll have a no, I'll know when to start approximately. Okay, I'll wait for a couple of more minutes and then start maybe. Uh, yeah, so maybe we can get started. Okay, so today's session is on least squares. So we'll see least squares approach to a particular problem, which is a set of overdetermined linear system of equations, and also we'll see a couple of applications. So the outline of the talk would be as follows. Firstly, we'll start with the problem, what is meant by overdetermined linear system of equations. And then we'll propose the least squares approach as an approximation solution. We'll have a look at the intuition and the properties of the least square solution. This will be followed by a couple of algorithms to implement the least squares. And then we'll look at the generalization of the least squares approach. And so this generalization is more suited to applications in data analysis. So we'll look at two applications towards the end of the lecture. So here we go. So first, what is an overdetermined set of equations? So suppose I have three equations in two variables. So we all know that this is nothing but three straight lines in the xy plane. So most are often than not, what you see is that these three lines are not concurrent. In other words, you don't have a solution to such a system. So in general, if I have more equations than the number of variables, then I cannot solve the linear system of equations. So what else can we do? So can we figure out an approximation? So here is the thing. So we, instead of solving exactly, which cannot be done, what we try to do is we try to minimize the norm of ax minus b. If there was a solution, then we could make it to 0, but since it doesn't, we try to minimize as much as possible. So here I have m as a set of number of equations, n is the number of variables, and this a and b are known matrices. So what exactly, so before we look at what a least square solution gives, let's try to understand what it does. So if I write the row vectors of A as A1 tilde transpose so on. So by the way, usually the alphabets A1 and so on are reserved for column vectors. So that's the reason I have used this transpose notation here. So if I have the row vectors as this, then the norm squared can be rewritten as sum of squares of these dot products of the x vector with the corresponding row vectors minus this uh, constant bj. So this is nothing but the least squares approximation solution gives me something which minimizes the sum of squares of the residual components given by this. So this is not very useful as such. So let's look at the solution in a different way. So now instead of working with the row vectors, what I do is I use the column vectors. So if I have a1 so on an as the column vectors of a, then this ax minus b can be written like this. So this is nothing but this is a vector in the span of this space spanned by this a1 to an. So in other words, I want to minimize the distance between. I want to find a vector in the span of the column vectors of A such that it is closest to B. So this is the idea. So now we all know that the distance is minimized when I mean the perpendicular distance is the least that we can get. So geometrically, this is what we have. So if I look at my column space as this plane that you see here. So for illustration purpose, I am using only two vectors here. So and b is any other vector which is a constant. Then my solution ax hat should be such that, so this we know that it's in the span of this two vectors, should be such that the difference between this ax hat and b should be perpendicular to each and every vector in this plane. So this is the intuitive idea. So let's look at it theoretically. So we all know from basic calculus that if we want a minimum, first thing that it should satisfy is that I mean, if assuming that the function is smooth, first thing that it should satisfy is that the derivatives should be zero. So that this is a necessary condition, but still not sufficient. So let's, if we compute the derivatives, we'll get a lot of equations. I'm not going to show all the details. So this you can probably verify it at home. So these things can be compactly written as the derivative condition as this. So this, in fact, is consistent with our intuition. So if you just multiply arbitrary vector z transpose here, so this is nothing but the dot product of az with ax hat minus b. So this is the same condition as the perpendicularity condition. So this is good. So we have a solution now. But although this is a necessary condition, it's still not sufficient. We need to check that any x hat that satisfies this particular equation should give me a minimum norm. So what I do is I pick an arbitrary x, and then I look at this ax minus b norm squared. I rewrite this as this, and then I break this. And this you can look at it as a norm of u plus v whole squared. So this is norm u squared plus norm v squared plus u transpose v plus v transpose u. So but then so both these u transpose v and v transpose u are same because these are scalars. So this vanishes because of this particular equation. So now you can see that no matter what x I choose, I'll always have this additional term, which means that this is minimized when x equal to x hat. For all other any other vector x, I have strictly greater value of this particular quantity. So now we have verified that we know. We know how the solution looks like. We don't have an algorithm yet, but we know how the solution looks like. So in fact, it's a good exercise to check that this least norm property is satisfied. So what I suggest is you can later write a small piece of code, generate a random matrix A and random matrix B. So you can choose anything. So this should be large enough so that the randomness induces you nicely. All we need is a matrix A such that the columns are independent. Otherwise, you won't be able to compute this. So the idea is to solve this system of equations. So this is, by the way, this particular condition is called as set of normal equations. So if my A was invertible, I would be able to have a unique solution by computing the inverse of A transpose A. So this you can verify by computing the direct inversion. So first you find this, and then you generate a few random vectors, and check that at that particular vector, if I compute the difference of these two quantities and take the norm, it would be strictly greater than the norm that we get at x hat, which is this particular quantity. So this is one way to check. Although this is not a proof, it's a good idea always. So yeah, so far we have seen that if I have a least squares approximation solution, it satisfies this what is called as the normal equations. And assuming that, I mean, if we have an additional assumption that the columns of A are independent, I would be able to get a unique solution by inverting this matrix. Although in theory this can be inverted, in practice it's not a very good idea to directly invert this matrix, because if you have a high condition number, the solutions won't be stable. So instead it's better to do find this solution by other methods, so which we shall see shortly. So first is that of QR factorization. So I take the matrix A, I rewrite it as product of an orthogonal matrix Q and an upper triangular matrix R. So now since my Q is an orthogonal matrix, what I do is I multiply both the sides with Q transpose. So which means that I'll be left with R x hat on the left hand side and Q transpose B on the right hand side. So now since my R is an upper triangular matrix, it's easy to solve this particular system of equations. So what I do is I start with the bottommost equation, which is a equation in just one variable. And then I keep doing that from bottom to up. So whatever values I get, I keep substituting, and then I get solution, complete solution. So this is one way to do it. Yeah, so this, if my column vectors are independent, the QR factorization would be unique, and I mean, this is as expected because we already know that the solution is unique. If my columns are independent, this algorithm also gives me just one solution. Yeah, so another way to do this is to iteratively compute the answer. So what I do is I start with a zero vector. You can start with any vector as such. I mean, zero has no speciality as such. And then uh, initialize a constant mu with 1 by norm a squared. Again, there's no hard rule that you should use this. Any small number would suffice, but so that smallness is relative with respect to a. So this is kind of a number that works well in practice. So what I do is until convergence, I keep changing my vector x by subtracting. So we know that my final solution x has to satisfy this particular expression equal to 0. So what I do is I subtract the component in the perpendicular. I mean, so whatever. So at every step, what I do is I try to get rid of the component which doesn't satisfy this property. So eventually, so this is somewhat close to what we saw in the last time in power iteration method. So I keep doing this. Eventually, I will converge to an x which satisfies this part equal to 0. So yeah, it's worth mentioning that my mu is something that acts like a learning rate in a gradient descent step. So for those of you who have done a basic course in machine learning, I mean, you would be knowing what a gradient descent is. Yes, so another sanity check that we can do with the iterative method is to check that it indeed converges. So again, try to generate a random matrix A and a random matrix B, and then compute the solution with direct inversion, and then run this iterative algorithm for a few iterations, not necessarily 500, something, I mean, you can check until it converges. So you can plot the solution obtained by your iterative algorithm and the direct inversion. Check this norm, you see that this goes to 0 as the number of iterations increase. So summary so far. So we have seen what an overdetermined linear system of equations is. And then we saw that it's not possible to have an exact solution. And we proposed least squares as a reasonable approximation. Then we looked at what geometrically the solution looks like, and the properties, which is that of the normal equations. And then we looked at a couple of algorithms to compute a least squares method. So is there any question so far? Oh, sorry, I didn't realize this. Is my voice still breaking? Okay, great. Yeah. So if there are questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, I'll keep continuing with the rest of the lecture. Yeah, okay. So let me continue with the lecture. So far we have seen how to compute least squares, but then this is not directly applicable to my problems. So in practice, I'll need a more involved kind of least squares, which would be uh, called as multi-objective least squares. So instead of having a single system of equations, I now have multiple set of uh, systems with same number of variables. So each AI is a mi cross n matrix, meaning I have mi equations in n variables, and bi is a mi sized vector. So now I wish to minimize, instead of just one least square, I wish to minimize a weighted least squares. So these weights, each of these weights are non-negative, and these are known beforehand. So how exactly would I compute the least square solution to such a, how do I minimize this particular cost function? So if we look at it carefully, I know that each x has same number of, so each AI has same number of columns, which means that I can somehow stack these matrices and then convert it into into the form that we have already seen. So which is this? So what I do is I reweight each of these matrices appropriately with the square root of lambda I, so that I bring them all to the same scale. And if I call A tilde as the stacked matrix obtained by this, similarly B tilde as the stacked matrix obtained by these, then the cost function can be written in this form. So this probably you can verify this at home. It should be fairly straightforward. So now that we have rewritten the cost function in the form that we know, we can use the algorithms that we have seen so far to uh, compute the least square solution. However, there's a catch. I mean, it's important to observe that uh, my A tilde, if the columns of A tilde are independent, not necessarily means that all the columns are of AI are independent. So in fact, one can easily verify that the independence condition. So you can check this at home again, or and it's easy to verify that if at least one of my AI has independent columns, then A tilde x is 0 uh, only if x is 0. Or in other words, A tilde has independent columns. So this is a very useful property in practice, and this has some far-reaching consequences. In fact, at a later stage, if you do a course in statistics, you'll be looking at what is called as ridge regression and lasso regression. So these ideas are based out of this particular property. So I mean, you don't have to worry if you don't understand these things right away, because anyway you'll be covering this in another course. But it's good to know that at this stage. So let's. Any questions so far? Um, okay. So I'll continue. So let's look at a couple of applications. So this least squares has plenty of applications in general. but we'll look at what is called as inverse problems. So we'll look at two such problems. So what are inverse problems exactly? I have some machinery. I know that I can only observe this vector of, I mean, this particular vector. I mean, the values that we observe is y, and A is a known matrix in the sense that although the original value is x, I am able to observe this particular quantity. So this epsilon comes from some kind of measurement errors or errors that are caused in the environment. So suppose, say, I mean, if I have a equipment to get some kind of astronomical images, so these epsilon errors might be some kind of Poisson noise or something of that sort, and this A is caused by the equipment. So I know in principle how exactly I obtain these observed values, and this is the true value that is of interest to us. So we wish to estimate what my x is, given that I know this A. Epsilon we know up till a certain extent, something like what the distribution is, and we know that it is small. So the idea is to reasonably guess x when we see y and when I know A and epsilon. So you might be wondering, okay, why not just do a direct inverse? So the problem is, again, most often than not, my A has A transpose A has high condition number. So those things don't work for implementation. So what do we do instead is we use the ideas of least square that we have seen so far. So let's look at a couple of problems. So first is, suppose I have a say I want to estimate the sales in a retail chain by hour of day, which means the hourly sales is what I wish to estimate, and I have the data of the previous days. So say suppose I have data of say previous year completely, then I have 24 into 365 data points. So I wish to assume how the sales would be for the next days by the hour of day. So ideally, so it's reasonable to assume that this particular model is periodic with period 24, which means that I mean, so this is reasonable. However, we need much more stringent assumptions, because in practice, it's the holidays sales would be very different from the non-holiday sales. But we are just to illustrate the idea, we are going to simplify that. So we assume that the model is same across each of the days, which means that I'll assume my sales for the next. I mean, I assume that my y is a simple function of a naught x plus some kind of error. So if I do that, I can stack my data model this way. So each A naught is like a 24 by 24 matrix. And since I am assuming that my total data is nice multiple of 24, I'll have this matrices without any truncations. So my A tilde is this. So here comes the regularization criteria. So instead of solving this directly, it's reasonable to assume that my sales in a particular hour, say 7 p.m. to 8 p.m., sales would be very close to 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. sales, as well as 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. sales. So the neighboring things we expect it to not differ by much. So this is some kind of a smoothness criterion, and this can be encoded with this particular matrix. So if I multiply this d circ with x, I'll get terms like x1 minus x2, x3 minus, sorry, x2 minus x1 here, and x3 minus x2, and so on and so forth. So what I do is, instead of minimizing the model directly, by the way, so this should be a tilde here, typo here. So I should try to, so the first term is the model norm minimization. The second is uh, I want to ensure that my neighboring sales are as close as possible. I mean, not very close, but they should be smooth. So this lambda is a weight that tells me how much smoothness that I wish to have. So in other words, if I have a very low lambda, that means that I am almost minimizing this, which means I don't want any smoothness as such. So on the other hand, if I go to the other extreme and set lambda to be very high and I minimize this cost function, then I would get more or less a constant solution. So that would flatten out completely. So in practice, I want to choose a lambda such that I get a good balance. So for one such lambda, you can see that if my data is something like this, uh, my estimates would be like a periodic function like you see here. So this choosing the lambda can be tricky in practice, but this how to choose lambda is a part of another course. I won't be covering it here. Uh, yeah, so now that we know how to use this regularization thing, we'll look at a slightly more involved example. More often than not, we when we capture images with our, when we capture images with our equipment, we see that the images are blurred. Although in principle, again, we know the kind of noise, the kind of blurring operator that we use and the noise, uh, it's not very straightforward to obtain the non-blurred version of this image, or in other words, the original image which we wanted to capture. So just to recap, so Y is my observed blurred image and A is the blurring operator. So classically, this would be a Gaussian operator or something of that sort. And X is the unobserved image which we want to estimate. And epsilon is the vector of random noise in the observations. So this you can think of it as some Poisson noise or something if we are working on, say, astronomical images. So although again, so my A is invertible, so the problem would be that direct inverse doesn't give two stable solutions because of the high condition number and so on. So what we do is uh, recall that we use some kind of smoothing to take care of the fact that I want neighboring values to be same in the last sales prediction. So continuing on that idea, so here, sorry, here when we are working on images, so image you can think of it as like a grid, right? So each pixel is adjacent to two pixels that are on the vertical line and two on the horizontal line. So this DHX essentially takes care of the fact that my pixels on the same row, or I mean horizontally, if they are next to each other, the values should be similar. And this dv is the vertical gradient in the sense that it takes care of the fact that my uh, okay, I did the other way, sorry. So this is the vertical one and this is the horizontal difference. uh, so I want to make sure that my x is as per the model, and also I want the smoothness criterion to be uh, to hold. So if I try to minimize this using our algorithm, then we get a very nice image. So you can see on the right hand side that it's a lot more sharper than the image on the left side. So for this particular image, we have lambda equal to this particular value is used. So you can see that this is a very small value, yet it gives good sharpness. Uh, yeah, so this tuning this lambda can be tricky in practice. So can you think of what happens if lambda is sufficiently large? I mean, what kind of image you'll see here? Anyone? Okay, so I'll give you a hint. So recall that if I have, yeah. So recall that if I had lambda equal to, very large value here, I would see some kind of a constant line here. in my previous sales example. So for this image, if I use lambda equal to say some 10 power 4 or something of that sort, what would I see? Okay, so what I would see is a constant image, which means that it will be completely, and none of the objects can be recognized. So it will be a constant image because I'm kind of forcing having a very high penalty on the fact that if my uh, neighboring pixels are different, both in the vertical sense and the horizontal sense. So if I want to minimize this function, this one with a high lambda, then it is forced to have same value for each of the pixels. So this criterion is completely lost, or in the other words, the model is completely lost. I just get a constant image, which is of no use. So you have to be very careful in tuning this lambda. Uh, okay, I think that's all I have. The lecture was okay, finished quite early today. If you have any questions, I can take, or if any part is not clear, I can explain it again. Any questions? Am I audible? Okay. Okay, was the lecture very fast or something of that sort? Or, I mean, you could get an idea. If you can get an idea, then that's good enough because so the content, more details of the content, you can find it in this textbook. So the lecture is completely, the content of the lecture is completely taken from this particular textbook, Introduction to Applied Linear Algebra, and this is by Stephen Boyd. Uh, so the details are available there. You can, so once you read that, it should be fairly clear. But if you don't understand the overview, then I'll repeat some parts of the lecture again. Okay. So okay. You can, I mean, you can write to me on email too. I mean, if you have any questions, that works as well. Uh,
Excuse me.
yeah.
Yeah, can you go to that sales example once?
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Can you just explain the problem statement once?
Okay. So I'm interested. The data that I have here. So recall that my inverse problems are of this form. So I have data of hourly sales at a retail chain. So each yi is a amount of sales that uh, I mean, so that was purchased in my retail store in the last 365 days. So which means I have a total of say 365 into 24 y values. And the x is I want to predict the sales value by r, say for the next 1 year. And I know that each of this uh, So the basic model and the underlying assumption is that my y1 up till y24 can be modeled as, uh, sorry, x1 up till x24 can be modeled as a0 times x1 to x24. So that's the basic model. So I know that it would uh, be a linear transformation of the sales at each of the hours in a day. Yeah, so this is the basic assumption.
So can you just explain this matrix once?
Yes. So instead of I can what I can do is directly I can try to invert this particular matrix. So that's one way to do. But then I want my solution to satisfy some property which I call it as a smoothness criterion. So although I want my data to be as close as possible to this particular model, which means that my y tilde should be like a tilde x, or I mean x should satisfy y minus a tilde x norm as less as possible. I additionally want each of my hourly sales to be uh, close to the neighboring hour sales. So for example, if I take a particular hour slot, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. So these sales I expect not to be very different from the sales I get in the slot 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. on the same day, and the slot 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. on that very day. So that condition, how do I encode in terms of a cost? What I do is, since I want this, I take a nice matrix this way. If I keep -1 and 1 on the diagonal and this particular, here, then if I multiply it with this x1, so on xn, I nicely get x2 minus x1, x3 minus x2, and so on. So if I multiply, if I then I can rewrite my whole cost as, so this particular first term penalizes for my model deviating from, I mean my answer deviating from the basic model that I wish to have, and this second term penalizes for values if they do not satisfy this particular smoothness criterion. So in a way, what I am doing is I'm getting some kind of a trade-off. So I want, I penalize this much for this model and weighted times the smoothness. If you just want, I mean, if you want to visualize how what happens, then if I set lambda equal to 0, that means I don't want any smoothness. All I want is my data to fit my model. In the other extreme case, if I take lambda to be very high, what happens is I mean I am penalizing a very large amount on the fact that if my x deviates from being smooth, I have a high cost. So if I minimize that particular cost function for high lambda, it turns out to be a constant x value irrespective of the hour that I look at. Or in other words, for high lambda, if I solve this particular, I mean, if I try to minimize this equation, then I get a constant line here, when I fit the model. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, good. Okay. Any questions other than this? So this is the core idea. So even for the next example, this is the basic idea. But since I'm, so the time series, you can think of it like a 1D signal. The neighbors are the next and the previous. Here on the other hand, the neighbors are nothing but the vertical neighbors and the horizontal neighbors. And I encode the regularization criterion this way. So this DH and DV matrices I didn't write here because they are far too complex. I mean, not very complex, but to write it's a I mean, space consuming thing. So the basic idea is same as this D circ, something like this.
And so you gave some award of caution, right? In when you are stacking that matrices. Heading is like
Yeah.
award of cash caution. Yeah. Can
Yes,
you
yes,
just
yes, yes.
can you just give some intuitive idea on this?
Okay, okay, fine. Um, okay, so suppose say my A tilde is stacking of two matrices. One is a uh, uh, non-invertible matrix, and the other one is the identity matrix. So if I stack it like this, A1 and A2, uh, with A2 being the identity matrix. So when would my columns be independent of A tilde? So this would always be independent. So the reason being, uh, I cannot write any column of the stacked matrix as a linear combination of the other columns, because my identity block in the bottom, that will ensure that no matter what I do above, I can, so these are kind of independent vectors below. So extending these independent vectors,
Yeah, yeah, I got it. I got
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, yeah. So that's the idea. So this idea is actually very crucial. If you look at ridge regression and lasso regression, that's what they do. So for ridge regression, they use a, okay, I won't go into those details. That would be confusing. Uh, so that we can discuss some other time. Um, more questions? Okay. So what's the? I mean, if you have any more questions, you can feel free to send me an email. So this is my email. Uh, So, okay. So what's the protocol? If you have any, I mean, no more doubts, then maybe we can uh, conclude the lecture. Yeah, okay. So I'll stop here. If you have any questions, just send me an email. Thank you.